I'm the citizen at large on the Nagog Orchard Ad-Hoc Working Group.
I'm Jen Clancy. I'm the other citizen at large on this group.
I'm Karen Morrison. I'm one of the select board members on the Orchard Group.
And I'm Matthew Nordhaus. I'm the other select board member, and I shouldn't be here because we have a quorum, but you didn't hear that from me.
And I'm going to introduce my lovely husband, John Lewis, who I have coerced into being our video guy.
I hope it's working.
So,
The light's flashing.
yeah, because my kids wouldn't do it, so here we go.
And at the Orchard, we'll have Sarah Seward, and I think is Will coming?
I don't think Will's coming.
Okay, so Sarah Seward will be leading, Sarah and myself will be leading that walk. And there's going to be two different walks, starting from the barn, kind of an upper one, and then a lower one. And we are obviously on a time constraint, so as Amy said, we're going to try to cut this clean at around 1 o'clock if we can, because we have a hard start at 1:30 because of the rain coming and also darkness coming early. So hopefully we'll be fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we also wanted to thank the Littleton Conservation Trust for their partnership for this walk. They have essentially lended us their insurance so that we could get this walk together quickly. Otherwise, we would have to have gone through several steps, which would have pushed this walk out. So we're really appreciative for their support. And a few housekeeping items. So the purpose of this community meeting today is to update the public on where we've been and where we hope to go. We're going to ask everyone to save their questions to the end because we really want to get through the presentation, and a lot of your questions may get answered through the presentation. Again, we really want to promptly end at 1 so people can head over. The walk will leave at 1:30. And as I've mentioned, you need to sign in for the walk before you start.
It's very wet over there, so if you don't have appropriate footwear, you may want to zip home, but we do have a 1:30 for the start.
There we go. All right. All right, so I'm going to start off with what is an APR, because there's lots of acronyms and we want to make sure that everyone is sort of on the same page with us. An APR is the Agricultural Preservation Restriction. It is a program that is run through the Mass Department of Agriculture, which we often refer to as MDAR or DAR. This property is 124.5 acres. 49 of the acres are in the APR program. We also have land that is in conservation, and we have general use property within the entire property as well. But we're focusing on the APR as part of this presentation. So what the basis of the APR program is that the state purchases the development rights to a property in exchange for a payment to permanently restrict the 49 acres to be in agriculture. The APR is tied to this piece of land no matter who owns it. There's very few ways of removing the APR. It requires a multi-year process through the state, and they have just made it more difficult to remove an APR program, and I'll get to that a little bit later on. The value of the program is that it supports agricultural industry, and it makes land more affordable to farmers. As you can imagine, purchasing an acre of land in Massachusetts is very expensive. It supports farmers, agribusiness, landowners, and it boosts the local economy and the food supply and the rural character. It preserves open scenic space, and it preserves our agricultural heritage. There is a deed restriction under the APR program that was written specifically for the Morrison property. Every APR is different. The Morrison property, our APR is held by the state. There are other APR programs on other pieces of land that are held by trusts or foundations. The APR allows for most types of agriculture on the property with the exclusion of cannabis. And you can have a horse breeding program, but you cannot have horse riding, for example, or a barn where we're just housing horses, for example. There are limits within the APR program, so you need written approval from the state for things like construction, taking soil away, depositing huge amounts of soil, septic, and asphalt driveways. I believe we're limited to 5% of any permanent like asphalt driveways and parking lots. And any non-agricultural use requires a special permit from MDR. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a new Article 97 that has come into effect as of February 2023. This is a program that's now part of the Massachusetts Constitution that makes it even more difficult to take APR land out. So it requires a supermajority of a passage of a bill for any predisposed disposition or change of use for a piece of land. It requires a 2/3 roll call of both the House and the Senate to transfer or change the use. And in addition, you need to be able to go through, prove to the state, you have to go through a very lengthy process with them, an alternative analysis, you need to do a natural resource assessment, a financial appraisal, you need waivers and modifications, but the biggest piece is you need to basically swap that piece of land with another piece of land in Littleton. So, So it is very difficult to remove, and the state has just made it even more difficult. And since Littleton is such a small town, it would be very hard to find an equal replacement piece of land.
If I could?
Oh, yeah.
And so all that is to say that if you are hearing rumors that, oh, they just want to, they're just going to sell it and build an Amazon warehouse, or they just want to put a Walmart there. Yeah, we're going through and showing you that that's legally, it can't be the case. That's not what's intended in the first place. It's not what any of us want. But even if we wanted to, that's just not feasible. And so we hope you will all rest easy with that knowledge.
Okay, so do you want to do this part with the map? So if you want to point while I maybe stand here.
Sure.
I
So
can
we
kind of-
have some maps. Amy's got it here.
Yeah.
We've got it pieced together a little here. I apologize, but they're such large maps, there was no easy way to kind of make this happen.
Yeah.
But this is Nagog Hill Road here, okay? And then
Which is right.
And then we have the main house is here and the main barn. So this is the four corners, the stop sign, which everybody is pretty familiar with. This is the large piece that everybody probably drives by and goes, oh, wow, it looks in pretty good shape. What's the problem? And then this goes down, this is towards Acton here. There's a second barn right across here on that corner. That's a private home right here. Sarah Doublet goes up on the side. So the biggest thing is the four corners. That's what everybody looks to, which, as Amy said, is right here. So the fields are all labeled. And again, typically what everybody sees from the road driving by is 3, 4, and 5. Those are the most open fields. And this is heading down towards Nagog Park, going that way.
Yeah, and so I think it's also important to note, sorry, Jen, that the house and the barn, although they're within the APR pieces of land, they are actually excluded. So the house and the barn are not within the APR envelope. They are excluded from that.
But the 49 acres is where the house and barn are?
Yeah,
Okay.
it surrounds it.
Okay.
Right, but they're not actually part of that program. So we are looking at ways, and there's pros and cons to it, about connecting the house and the barn to the APR program so they can't be separated, because any farmer is going to need a place to live, and any farmer obviously needs a barn. So we want to try to find ways to keep them together. However, we also found out that you can't, we need to kind of get more information on it, but there may be limits. Like, so for example, if you took this barn and you wanted to, for example, like Stormalong Cider wanted to like process apples for cider, you can't make value-added products on APR land. You would have to put it in the general use area. And this is general, correct me if I'm wrong, this piece here is a general use area up in here.
And further back too, further up.
Further up here.
Along the top part.
And Conservation Commission, it's this piece of land right here. Yeah, that parcel.
When we walk, we'll explain as we're going through what is what.
Is that land you just pointed to, it's pretty wet back there, is it?
Very wet. We
Is
said
it
earlier.
classified wetland?
Nope. Nope.
Right. Okay, so this is what the property includes. It includes, in going back, so hold on one second. So this map here that I'm showing you is a USDA map. And from that map, they extrapolated that there was approximately between 5,000 and 300 fruit trees that was identified by the USDA in 2001. The property includes a residential structure, a main barn, a lower barn, a cottage, several sheds that are in mostly poor condition. There are 2 town water connections, and there's supposed to be a well on the property. However, we have yet to find it on the property. We've walked it many, many, many times. And the water department has also been on the property as well, so.
On this slide, when she talks 5,000 to 5,300 fruit trees, that includes all the stone fruit trees and the apple trees. So the stone fruit trees are the ones closer to the big barn or the upper barn, kind of behind it and off to the left. And then the apple trees are everywhere else.
Yep. Yes, go ahead.
So this has been really a learning process for all of us. We all knew little bits of information, but it's amazing when you start drilling down all the things you learn. Like I thought, well, an apple tree is just like a regular tree, right? Just grow, grow, grow until you're done. It's not the case. So apple trees have really a life expectancy of roughly, give or take, 20 years. So you've got to keep that in mind when we, again, walk through the orchard. And this group has been working for 2 years now, and every year there's fewer and fewer apples because the orchard hasn't been maintained as it once was. But the age of the trees was something that was a real eye-opener for all of us.
Everybody keeps talking about that. I live up there, and I have a couple of apple trees that aren't taken care of. But the past 2 years, there haven't been as many apples because it hasn't been the right weather for it. I'm just saying, what you're saying may be true, but I don't know if it's just, that they're not getting fed or pruned or whatever.
As we go into the presentation, you'll see what we've done to arrive at that conclusion as well. So.
Do you want to do that first part of the timeline?
Sure. Okay, so in 1999, the town voted to acquire the property, the Morrison property. And the Morrison property basically had been farmed since the 1700s, which is really kind of interesting, and there's a history behind that that I'm sure Dawn would love to jump into. But the town voted to acquire that property in December of 1999, and the town also voted to give the Board of Select the oversight of the lease. So that was decided in May of 2000, and the Conservation Commission was able to now have control of those self-help areas that we talked about on the map. So going forward, in May, the Board of Select approved a lease for Nagog Hill Fruiters. Charles Auger, I'm sure any of you driving by or walking by saw him. He always had a couple of dogs with him. And so he signed a lease with the town. And the Conservation Commission in July submitted a plan for the self-help areas. And that is, if I'm not mistaken, public record. So if anybody wants to read that, we as a group dove into that and looked to see, you know, all the different angles of that. So that is available for you all to, if you want any further information. But it was a well laid out plan on how to take care of the orchard going forward. In April of 2002, an APR was placed on 49 acres. That's what Amy alluded to earlier on. And then Charles was, or Nagog Fruiters had been, the lease was renewed, so he was there in essence almost 20 years. Things started to change at the orchard. There was not the same maintenance plan that there had been in the past, including what's called IPM, Integrated Pest Management, which includes spraying, pruning, all of that. So the town attorney reached out to Nagog Hill Fruiters in July and basically let them know that we were not renewing the lease. The orchard was falling in disrepair. And then eviction papers were served in October of 21. And then our group came on board in November of 21 to try to figure out what next steps would be. So that takes us to the beginning of the ad hoc working group.
Oh, do you want to do it?
Sure. So our first working group meeting was November of 21, and there was a group prior to us that had worked on the RFP, request for a proposal, which basically entails getting people's plan for what they would like to do for the land. And again, it's a very complex process. So what we did as this new working group is we started off looking at the previous RFP and said, okay, how can we make this better? How can we make this property more appealing to get a farmer in here? So there's an awful lot of research that was done. We had group members going to other orchards to talk to people. We saw people pruning. It was just a big information gathering up front, and it continues to. We keep learning new stuff all the time. Yep, and then UMass came out in 2022, John Clemens, who runs a program out there, and he gave us his opinion of the orchard at that point. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah,
or?
and so his report basically said, in his opinion, was what parts of the orchard to focus on. And so he said that the most viable trees, or really the only viable trees, were in these 3 parcels right up in here. And that we should try to focus our efforts on those because the rest of them were no longer commercially viable. And it was not a good investment of the town's money to try to bring those back because they couldn't be. And it wasn't a good use of funds.
And it's interesting because as we were gathering information and we learned about what is a properly pruned tree and what isn't, John Clemens, again, his suggestion was let's concentrate on those. And it's funny because that when you drive past the orchard, that is the part that looks great. And you're probably thinking, well, but we had a group up there as well. We had a volunteer group. I don't know if any of you were there, but we hired somebody. So we had to get bids for pruning, and we got several bids. And we went with Haskell, and they pruned 20 acres, and the brush that came off of that was amazing. And the problem was it was kind of wet. We tried burning, it couldn't burn, so we stacked these piles of brush. But what we'll see on the walk later on as well is that is what Nagog Fruiter had been doing for years, was pruning and basically pushing all those branches back. There is a stone wall under all that debris in the back, which we'll see. but,
So we started in November of 2021, and the pruners, they came in February or early March.
March,
In
yep.
March, and did the pruning. And then the request for proposal was posted publicly. So while we were gathering information, talking to UMass, searching for pruners, putting out a bid for pruners, we were also working on revising the RFP and going back and forth a lot with town council.
And in terms of pruning as well, you've got all these branches with nowhere to go. And pruning can only be done, this was another thing too, pruning can only be done, or should only be done, when the ground is firm. So if you're going in there with equipment or machines or something, you're not chewing up the property. So we were limited, and of course with our lack of real cold weather last year, it made it very challenging to try to get the job done. But the bids, just so you know too, bids can be just for cutting or pruning. They can also be inclusive of removal, whether that's chipping or dumpsters or whatever. So you have to look, and again, that's something we all learned. We figured, oh, okay, you prune them. Isn't it automatic they take the prunings? And it's not.
That's additional cost.
So this is all, so we're trying to be cognizant of the town's money that we will be spending. So we had to look at every viable option. And you know, we talked about maybe volunteers. It was way too big a project, way too big to have that much help on a volunteer basis. So to Amy's point, this whole time, we're also working on the RFP, and town council is town council for a reason. So we come to them with ideas, and you know, sometimes it's no, we can't do that, yes, we can. So that was an awful lot, that was months, going back and forth with town council. And as a group, we were very cognizant of how the RFP would be worded. While we have to be careful legally, we wanted to attract people to this property. All right, jump in on Moe?
No, so then we put out the RFP out into the world. It stays out there for a month, and we had advertised it through lots of different outlets, and we had no respondents. And so then we said, okay, we're gonna put it out again, and we did for a month, and we got one bidder, and that was Storm Along Cider. So the town starts to go into negotiations and talk with them and try to work out a lease, because they were interested in a lease. Because at that time, we were only looking at a leasing option. And then what was sort of happening at that point is you're moving sort of like into the summer, Park and Rec starts doing their mowing. The board, the committee requests that the house and the buildings all become winterized. UMass, John Clements comes out for a second time to do another assessment. Then we move into, I think it was January 1st, we had the water main break in the house because the oil ran out in the oil tank. At this point, the negotiations with Storm Along Cider ends. They can't come to an agreement. And then the work begins, our committee work begins again because there was negotiation happening. We're like, okay, they've got it. And then it stopped, and then we started working again. And this time, we have decided to put out an RFI. And Karen, do you want to talk about the RFI?
Sure. So an RFI is a request for information. And so we have been just finished finalizing that, and that's over with town council now. And what a request for information, ours in particular, is looking for is ideas. It's not looking for bids, it's not looking for anything that we're going to act on immediately, but what we're hoping is that we're going to get interested parties who are thinking outside the box, perhaps, because we've tried putting out the RFP as a strict orchard only, and we haven't gotten the responses that we need. So this time we're sending out a very broad RFI that explains the land, explains the status of the land, and asks folks to come to us with their ideas for what they would do with it and how they would be responsible in terms of doing it, in terms of servicing the land consistent with the APR again. The APR is there, it's not going away. So it's gonna be an agricultural use. But there's lots of different options for agricultural use. And so we're asking folks in a broad general way to come to us with their ideas. That'll help us shape the next RFP. So that instead of us defining the use and seeing if anybody's interested, the next time we're going to write the RFP so that we know that there's parties that are interested in responding to it.
And that's inclusive as well of where we post. The
Yes.
first time around, it was basically anything farm-related. New England Farmers, MDR, all these different sites, but they were basically farm-focused. And we're throwing the net a little bit wider now. And to Karen's point, it'll be interesting to see what people come to us with. We might have not even thought of some of the things that are coming to us. And there's other orchards in the area that have come up with different uses for part of their property. So we're not looking to get out of agriculture. We are just looking for, hey, what else can you do with this? And it used to be probably when all of us were growing up, you went to an orchard, you picked apples, you went home. And now, any orchard you go to, there's an expected experience that goes along with that. And it's not uncommon for a family to drop, $100 because they want the pie, they want the dish towel, they want, So these are all things that we're looking at as a group, how to make it more attractive to a farmer or someone who's not a farmer.
Yeah, and I think the other point that needs to be made is agriculture has changed, the markets have changed. Farming is it's a business, it runs like any other business. And the reality is you can't own an apple orchard that's just in apples and be able to cover your expenses and run a profitable business. That has gone, that does not exist anymore. Anyone who is farming and has apple trees also needs to be doing other things to make it a functional, a working business. So yes, anyone who comes in, even if they want to try to replace the trees and do some apples, they're probably also going to be doing diversified vegetables, or maybe they'll be branching animals, or maybe they'll be processing something on site and making value-added products. That is the only way that anyone is going to be able to run a profitable farm business on this property. The market has shifted for sure. And so, let's see. Yep, so we recently, last week, I was at the orchard with Sarah Seward, Brad Mitchell, and Landvest, who is doing an evaluation of the property. We also have had another assessment of the trees and the invasives on the property as well. And we have drafted the RFI. I assume we have to approve it.
It's got to go over to town council, then once we have it with town council, we're going to send it over to DAR and make sure that they're okay with it. They do have a right of first refusal, and so it's important to get that incorporated into the process so that they're not armchair quarterbacking later. And then we'll be going out on the street, and we've been talking about different ways to get that publicized outside of the usual channels.
Yeah, so there are a lot of stakeholders that are involved in this process, and we have to be coordinating with all of them, and it takes time as well, particularly when you're working with the state. So, and then here we are at the community update. So, and then Karen, I don't know if you want to go through the expenses a little bit, and I can.
Sure. Okay. So, in terms of what we've been expending, again, as we were talking about, it's important to us as a committee to be responsible in terms of the money that we're spending. It's also important to note that we don't have a line item in the budget for taking care of the orchard right now. And so this is generally, money that we were able to pull from various sources based on the use. The electricity is primarily in the barn and the house. And that's been about $3,000 so far this year. Then there's water use and some wages. The part-time wages are for the mowing that we've had done by the
Park and Rec and
DPW. Of course, mowers need fuel, so we've been paying for that as well. And then we had a tractor that was
Purchased through
through
ARPA
ARPA funds, so back during the COVID times, when there were those grants coming through, we were able to obtain a tractor for that purpose. And then, let's see.
Tree pruning is on
Tree
there.
pruning
Yep.
and
Legal
pesticide
fees.
removal
Yeah.
from the leaseholding days. I'm not sure, HHP service.
That's
the pruners.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, of course,
Legal counsel.
legal counsel, of course, for every step of the way, and that's a significant chunk as well. But we're totaling $180,000
There's some,
so far.
and there's some additional costs that we haven't been able to quite, I guess, nail down. When the property was finally vacated, we were all very surprised at what was still in the buildings. And there was an awful lot that had to be removed. So part of that was taken care of by Park and Rec, part was DPW. We had dumpsters there, so it's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly. That's why we have these rough estimates of costs. But it's not as if, you know, somebody could walk in and immediately live in that house or take over the barn. There was just, I believe all of us were shocked at what was still in there.
Yeah.
So there was that whole piece of it too.
And what wasn't, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot there that needed to be removed, and there was a lot of things that we had hoped would still be there in terms of equipment that no longer were.
Equipment and records of the trees, what was planted where, the varietals. So that left us in a really tough spot.
All right, so this is our progress to date. So we completed the first request for proposal that went out into the world. We had negotiations with the only bidder that came forward. We've had regular assessments of the orchard. We've done the pruning and the maintenance. We've developed a request for interest, which is our new strategy that we're going with. Removal of most of the trash and the items from the barn and the house, and then the collective learning of the enormity of the property.
If I could jump in really quick, one thing we did was we had the Historical Society come up at one point before we started removing things and said, have at it. You know, if there's something here that you think is worthy of saving, there were some really neat old yolks and things like that. So they were able to capture some of those things and remove them. So we didn't just trash everything. We let people, you know, the Historical Society go through it.
So here are some of the challenges of the property. So the house and all the outbuildings need repairs or to be brought up to code. Again, in January, the house flooded. The house needs to be gutted. Fire blight was noted as early as 2000 from the USDA maps, but it is spread through the entire orchard. And as of October 2023, the majority of the fruit trees are no longer viable as a commercial operation. And so I just want to clarify that. Like, you may see some apples on the trees, but those trees are not producing the yield that is required to run a farm business with a focus on apples.
And also, if you bit into one of those apples, you would see, as I tried, they are no longer viable because they have not been treated. And you can't go from treating for 20 some odd years to not treating. It doesn't work for the apple. If you start organic, you can continue to go organic, but you can't switch like that. But basically, if you bit into an apple or broke it open, you'd see a lot of black lines, you'd see worms. And the outside, I thought, oh, you know, these look pretty good. Yeah, don't take a bite.
Yeah. So the other challenges, and I think this is really important to understand because farms are businesses, and the cost of accessing land, whether it's purchased or whether you have a lease, you need a lot of working capital to start up the farm business. And access to capital and access to land are the two greatest challenges in farming. And the size of the property makes that challenging, and the fact that it wasn't maintained for a long time and investments made into it are additional costs that will have to be realized. And any farmer that comes in, again, is going to do, you know, other things with the property, and so they're going to have to change the farm system over, which again is an investment, which requires a return on investment at some point. If the land is purchased, the farmer cannot receive agricultural property tax reductions until there's 2 years of revenue. That comes from the Department of Revenue, that doesn't come from MDR. The town also, in terms of the leasing option, the town truly lacks the resources, the expertise, and the capital to oversee a lease. There's no one in the town who knows how to oversee a farm or an orchard, knows what to look for, knows where to go, knows what the questions to be asking. There is also no budget allocated to this working group, and there has never been a budget line item in our town budget to maintain or invest, oversee in the orchard, ever. The soil quality is unknown. There is an irrigation system, but it's decommissioned. And if anyone who comes onto the property wants to do something other than tree fruit, they're going to have to remove all the trees and de-stump the property, which is that is a very large cost.
We investigated that as a group, what that would cost, and to Amy's point, it is very expensive, so before we do that, that's why we're putting out the RFIs. What else can we do? What else can we do? But stump removal is not inexpensive, and then it's removals of the removals. So
Yeah.
it's all these different things we're trying to figure out, and it's like an octopus, all kinds of costs.
Yeah, so it's a big property. Let me go back to where we were. Did I finish that slide? Yep, I did. So, challenges, so there's a lot of challenges to the property. Like I said, we put out an RFP, no one applied. And there's a reason for that. And then we put it out again, and we only got one bidder, and there's a reason for that. Because if farming was really easy and profitable, a lot of people would be doing it. But it's very difficult. The work is hard, the margins are thin, and the work is too risky, emotionally, physically, mentally, and financially. So challenges in attracting an applicant include a mortgage on the property if they want to buy it. Rent would also is also expensive because vegetables don't cost a lot of money. Taxes on the property. Their investment of cash and time and ability to receive a return on investment. They need the startup cash and the time to start the farm business. The house needs remediation and needs to be gutted. There's over 5,000 trees that need to be dealt with or stumps removed, depending on what this farm operation wants to do. The main barn has broken windows, the roof needs to be repaired, and the siding probably also needs to be repaired or changed over. There is a compressor unit in the main barn which kept the apples cool. That needs to be recharged. There's still removal of some traction barns that we need to get to. There's repairs to field sheds. There's a cottage that some of the farm workers lived in, but that needs plumbing and heat and insulation. There's some removal of asbestos that we need to deal with. In the area where the apples were kept cool, we don't think it's asbestos, but it's some sort of like insulation, and some of it is exposed, and it probably doesn't meet food, health, and safety requirements. The cost of paying labor on a farm is one of the biggest challenges in farming. And then to pay someone not just minimum wage, but a living wage in Massachusetts, so the farmer and their farm staff can live in the state. Because we are losing farmers in Massachusetts because they can't afford to farm and live in Massachusetts because of the cost is so high here. Prevailing wage for the town is also a challenge for the town. The soil needs soil tests. One of the things about the property that makes it so great for apples is because it's on a slope, which makes it great for apples, but it also has erosion issues, and the soil is a little bit rocky. So. All right, so these are some, do you want to do this while I take a sip of water?
Sure.
All right.
No, it's kind of self-explanatory there. You're looking, the picture on the left is how the trees up until this point have been pruned, and you see how they're going straight up, those branches. That is not what you want. If you go, just drive over to Carlson's. I mean, Carlson's has been at it for more than 30 years to get those trees where they are. But trees are pruned and trained much differently than they used to be. But the short story is, how are you going to get up top like that? It just makes it much more challenging, particularly since, or if you have a pick your own concept as well. So the trees, that's one of the other reasons. And then the invasives, you will see today, that is pretty standard, the picture on the right. They are just totally engulfed with bittersweet, poison ivy. Even be very careful when you walk through, because our walk, we're planning on cutting across some rows. Don't trip. I mean, there's vines, there's irrigation pipes. Just be very careful, but that shows you what we're up against. So you can't, it makes it difficult to mow when you have now thick vines. If you don't cut it, it just gets bigger and thicker. And then mowing won't do it. Then you've got to come up with something else. So now that we're 2 years past the process, when it started, it's probably closer to 3 years since it's been properly maintained. So we're kind of band-aiding as best as we can, but you will see.
Yeah, so just as an image, you know, this is what you'll see at the orchard. The tree has gotten very wide. There are all these just like tiny
Offshoots.
that are going up into the air. What you need is a tree that is more thinned out, that lets a lot of light in. And as our pruners said, like, you need to be able to throw a cat through between the branches. If you can do that, you've pruned it well. So that's what it's supposed to look like. Okay. So because agriculture has changed, okay, it's also quarter up, so I'm going to be fast. So we can get through this. So there's, right. So there's a couple of different ways people can access this property. They can purchase the property, they can lease the property, or they could lease to purchase it in the future. And there's pros and cons for doing it in different ways. If you purchase a property, you know, you can, after 2 years of income, you can apply for a chapter. Owning land helps build multi-generational wealth, and land is an asset class in itself. You can leverage your assets for investment. It doesn't require oversight from the town. Your property will appreciate over time, and if you own it, you have more access to state funding programs, right? But you also have to pay taxes. If you lease land, you don't have to pay taxes, but you pay rent. You cannot apply for chapter, which again reduces your tax burden. There is a decreased incentive to invest in the property because you don't own it. You're not going to put an incredible huge amount of investment into it if you can't sell it at the end of the day and walk away with the value. That's not a business decision a farmer would make or anyone would make. Soil is also an investment for a farmer. And you also cannot sell the property or realize the return on investment. It does require oversight from the town. And if you lease land, there's limited access to state funding programs to help build your farm business. If you lease to purchase, you can apply for chapter after you've owned it and you are the owner of record. It provides people with an opportunity to test their business idea. They would put limited investment in, but then if they purchased it, they would then probably ramp that up over time. And any lease would require oversight of the town, and then to purchase a negotiation with the town and town council. And then you would pay rent, and then after that, when you purchase it, you would pay taxes. So, okay, farms are businesses too. So I wanted to dispel the myth of what a farm looks like, because agriculture can be organized in a lot of different ways. So what you might traditionally think of as a farm business as the farms that we have in town. They're multi-generational family farms that are run by a group of the same people, right? It is not owned or run by people outside of that family unit. If a farm business that is owned by a family, it can be an investment, because this multi-generational wealth that's passed over through the generations. There's usually a sole entrepreneur. That person is making all the decisions, the planning, and the innovation. The overseer wears many hats, and it can be willed or it can be sold. There's also you can also run it as a nonprofit, so it has a mission, it has a board of directors and a staff. The stakeholders include your donors and your foundations, including your banks and your customers, for example. You have earned income and fundraising to meet your budget. It cannot be willed and it cannot be sold, and it can access private and public funds. So you can also have a co-op model. You might think of, for example, like food co-ops, like the new one that they have in Maynard. It requires a lawyer to set up. It is a diversified team of unrelated people, and you bring in people with separate skills that add specific value to that business. And you can leverage equity to pay your employees, because it's very difficult in farming to pay your employees, so you can look to other ways of paying your employees by having it employee-owned. And then there's the collective co-own model. It is also a food business. It's a diversified team of ownership sharing. People can have shares, they can have equity, they can have employee stock, they have partnership in the business. And I always tell people, think about Silicon Valley, the way startups in Silicon Valley run and the way they offer multiple ways to pay people and to build other people's wealth. That would be in this model. And again, it is owned and managed by a diversified team of unrelated people. So moving on to the next slide. So what are our goals for 2004? So we are having, sorry, there's this light, I can't see that. So we will be receiving a land valuation from Landvest, hopefully sometime in January. The request for interest should be made public in January. We will review the request for proposal also in January, start taking a look at that, and we will definitely be diving deeper into that when the request for interest public period has closed. When we receive the request for interest, the applicants, we will not be screening people in or out. We will then just be inviting them to what will be 2 walks on the property. And then from there, anyone can apply for the request for proposal, which we hope to make available in March. And that will be the process where we'll be qualifying people in and out to move forward with. And we hope to be able to start in town negotiations in June. And it may be not just one farmer, it could be potentially 2 farmers that are on the property as well. Because someone could purchase half the APR and someone else could purchase the other piece of the APR as well.
So 2 things that I wanted to add too. The biggest goal is to honor the vision of what the Morrisons wanted for this property. So that is first and foremost what we are trying to do. And secondly, just so you're all clear too, that we are an advisory committee. We don't make the decision, okay? So our job is to gather information as best we can, share that information, get public feedback, and then make a suggestion or suggestions, but we don't ultimately make that decision.
Yeah, but the board is select. The select board will make as the authority to enter into a lease. Any land purchase would have to go to town meeting, of course, so. The purpose of this group is to find out who is interested in this property and what they'd like to do with it, can figure out what our best options are from there, and then take it to the appropriate authority for review.
And the Morrison legacy is to keep it a working orchard?
Yes, and it has to be because it has an APR on
A
it.
working farm, not a
Working
working
farm,
orchard.
yeah, a working farm because it has an APR program on it. So I guess we'll answer any questions. So yes,
Does your group have an email or a central place that we can send our ideas to?
We haven't had one. We've posted everything publicly. Some people in the audience we're familiar with have reached out to us.
I have a Littleton email, so feel free to send anything to me and I'll make sure that it gets to the rest of the group.
Thanks.
Are the slides available today, from today?
yeah,
Can we get this?
we'll make them public.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Just to clarify, you were talking, this area you're talking about is 49 acres? What about the rest of the whole orchard? Is there any information on what's going to happen to it?
Well, the land that's in conservation will stay in conservation.
It will, so 9,000 condos won't go in up there?
Yeah, so the conservation land is in here, and then this is, Dawn, is this Littleton Conservation Trust? Because you own some land, or you just maintain the conservation?
Trust, there are other people from the trust will speak to.
Oh, Rick?
The trust owns a part of it, but the orchard, there is a section that's owned by the orchard.
It's a bit of a patchwork. To my understanding, the only land that has no restrictions on it is the farm and the upper barn.
Yeah.
Potentially, we're still trying to figure this out, the cottage and the farmhouse and the upper barn, and then we're trying to figure out the status of the cottage and the second barn, the lower barn. But those are the only parcels within the entire property, to my knowledge, which is imperfect, that do not have some sort of restriction attached to them in terms of what can be done with them.
Okay. Mr. Sagal?
First of all, I want to say thank you very much for all your hard work and effort. It looks like a monumental task, and you certainly put a lot of time and effort into it. So I have a couple of questions. My first question, for the house that flooded, why didn't we just put a insurance claim in to fix it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the town does have insurance on the property. However, they did not have insurance for vacancy, which was why they would not pay the claim.
So we forgot to put oil in and the house flooded.
The oil ran out.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Ms. Sagal?
If we are marching towards signing another lease potentially with another tenant, so to speak, what work is being done to assure that we don't have a repeat performance? Because as the owner of the property, we had an obligation to look out for the property that we own, protect the investment, don't let it get as degraded as it currently is. What I don't hear is, what work, and I'm sure it's happening, but can you confirm for us that that is also being looked at? Because that is how we got here, that we didn't protect our investment.
Yeah, and that's,
Or you, go ahead.
yeah, so that absolutely, that's a great point. And that's a frustration of many of the members on the committee. Again, the town doesn't have the resources or the capacity to do it. And, I know I can speak for myself personally. I'm very concerned about this property being leased out again, because there's nothing different today within the town that makes them competent and capable to oversee the lease, which is why I am personally very much in favor of someone purchasing the land, because if you own it, it's going to be a huge cost and a huge investment, and it's going to be your farm business, and you're going to run it like a business. It's going to be your livelihood, and you're way more incentivized, because this property is so big, to run it well. And that's my opinion.
So if I could speak to that as well, the short answer immediately, what we're doing right now to prepare for somebody to lease this property, is putting out the RFI to find out if anybody's interested in leasing the property. Once we find out that someone is interested in leasing the property, then I think the group will start working in a focused way on applying lessons learned. In general, I can tell you that the town is interviewing for a facilities director, which is something we haven't had for a while now. That person would be able to help somewhat, but to Amy's point, we don't have an orchardist. And the town would have to make some tough decisions about whether we want to fund the management costs of leasing an orchard again. And I think that would have to be part of the vote. It can't just be, are we going to lease our property to this person? It's gonna have to be, are we gonna lease our property to this person? And are we willing to pay what it takes to make sure that the property is managed properly?
To that point too, I also want to throw in that it does no good to point fingers. You know, we're all upset over the condition of it right now, so we need to move forward. And part of that is town council is really drilling down, and here's where our group has kind of, I don't want to say butted heads, but the pendulum has swung the other direction. And now what they would like us to write is very, very
complicated. So the first RFP that went out was incredibly complicated, and so Cindy Napoli, who's our former Board of Selectmen, who's a paralegal, she's like, I don't even understand this document. There were many of us who felt it was not very warm and friendly document to approach. So, Mr. Sullivan.
Just a quick note. I'd like to point out as an abutter for the property and for the select board
so
to
you
realize.
Live...
I live in the old Morrison house, yes, next to the lower barn.
Yeah.
That for the select board to realize that the health of the property also impacts the health of the abutters. Because there's been a lot of collateral damage. Since we moved in 3 years ago, we've spent a lot of money to try to treat and protect our fruit trees. We've lost a bunch of them and others because of disease, not because of the weather, but we can't deal with it. So that's past tense now because there's nothing we can do about it. But protecting that property and letting it grow helps those who abut the property as well. So I just wanted to pass that out.
Yeah, and so when Stormalong Cider came along, they wanted to put a apple cider processing plant on the property. And we all said, I'm not so sure how the neighbors are gonna feel about that. And so we encouraged them to move over to the industrialized zone, which they eventually agreed to do. So we're always thinking about the property. Sarah Seward is in butter, Jen's in a butter. So we definitely recognize the value of that orchard in terms of... It's 104. Oh, it's 104, okay. So who has it back in the back?
Yeah, just one question. So in Lindsay Ketchell is Sudbury Valley Trustees. And so we are a regional land trust. We work in 36 communities. We own a ton of land and we manage land. And we actually have people who are skilled at doing this. And I just feel sorry for this community because you came into it with the best of hearts to protect important farmland. But honestly, I think you're a little over your head right now and it's a sad situation. And so I guess I would just encourage you to consider reaching out to maybe other land trusts like ours to see what roles we could potentially play. I think someone invited me here. I didn't even know about this. So there's a lot of resources out here. We do this for a living, right?
Yeah.
We're professional people doing this. So I happen to do farming for 20 plus years in Vermont, so I know a lot about it. In 1990, the average farmer made 6 cents for every dollar you spent on a product, right? How much do you think a farmer makes today? So this 1990, 6 cents for every dollar. When you went to a grocery store, the farmer got 6 cents. How much do you think farmers make today?
4 cents.
Yeah. So when we talk about the economics, it's challenging. But what I love, though, is you've got an amazing piece of property. And what I would also encourage this community to do is, while you have the history of the orchard, move forward, because climate's here, we have a new reality coming. How can this property be a cornerstone to your community and how to reach out to others if in fact you can't find someone to lease? I think you're going to have a hard time.
Oh yeah,
I think you are going to have a really hard time. And then and I'm assuming you're only looking at leasing now, but if then after your investments you're going to look for acquisitions, there might be some organizations who could really come in and help you out.
To clarify, the RFI is open for folks to either propose leasing or leasing to own or buying.
Or buying, okay, so you didn't know that. So and then who did you network that out to then?
It's not out yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
They
then,
were
yeah,
all their
then let me,
suggestions.
give me a call sometime, Lindsay, let's see how we can help you guys.
Yes, please.
Expand the land trust, potential roles land trust could potentially play. I also ran an incubator farm program. Beginner farmers really need access to
I'll
land.
give your information afterwards.
Okay.
Is there someone who hasn't asked a question?
Well, I have a question too.
James.
You were about
Okay.
Sorry, it's right there.
Could you talk about Field 5, which is 30 acres in general use, and I don't think it's protected?
This in here?
No, you're regional
Sorry. Where's the other map?
trustees.
Me down here, the one.
What if that is self-help, right?
It was on your presentation that was on the website.
That's
Oh, that's a different map.
That's a, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're using the USDA map. That map that you saw in the presentation, one of the Board of Selectmen had, and it just became, we just needed a map that we could easily identify sections of. Do you remember which map that was? Maybe I'll catch you.
So on this one, Field 5 is by Four Corners there.
Okay, so it's this
So
one
if that's
here.
what you mean, the one that's right by the stop
Yeah,
sign,
I'm
the
just
Four
looking
Corners?
at your presentation that's on the town website.
That's a different map. So that, to Amy's point, that's why we had to go with one map. So use, this will be available for the public, this presentation, and that's the map that you want to
Okay.
use.
Okay.
Is
In
it
the green in the
possible
front, ma'am, in the green in the front next to. you
Oh,
had a
yeah, I
question?
was just gonna ask, I'm kind of surprised we never had, and you're right, a line item for the orchard maintenance in our budget. What can we do to pressure our town management to make that happen, so that we always have some sort of budget item to
Yeah,
deal
so
with it?
what I would suggest is wait for this RFI and RFP process to play out, because if someone wants to lease it, then the question will come up about the town making sure there are funds available to invest, to make the investments where a farmer will not. And if if it ends up being purchased, then that's up to the farm owner to make those decisions.
I guess I would say, because we're rolling into the budget process right now, for the next budget year, so I would say, if that's something that's important to you, email any member of the select board. Probably the chair is the best way to start. I'm always happy to forward things on though too. And Ryan Ferrara, who's our interim town administrator.
Because I think you're always gonna have some baseline amount, no matter what.
And then Steve Venuti, who is the chairman of the finance committee. So, finance committee, chairman of the select board, and the interim town administrator. Those would be the three people that I would make sure are on the two lines for your emails.
All right.
The
Sarah
thing that
has-
wasn't answered, your question about the house is, and this woman in green's concern about taking action now, is the house, the current condition of it, doesn't need to wait for the RFI to remove the mold and remove the peeling lath and plaster, whatever. That needs to be done.
It does, but it's
Yeah.
already beyond what can be fixed. It's got to be gutted, so why put the expense into it if somebody comes in? For instance, Stormalong thought they might have a tasting room there. So why fix it if we don't know what the use will be in the future?
Right,
So
yeah.
that's why we're.
Well, I'm not talking about fixing, I'm talking about getting rid of the stuff that's gonna cause future damage, like the structure rotting because it's got rotting lath and plaster in it, or animals digging in there and chewing away the structure.
Right, have we stopped the damage?
That's what I'm saying, and I thought that's what.
The
we
water
needed.
is now shut off.
Right, but
But
mold continues to grow.
We had
so-
fans in there for quite a while.
So everything is stopped.
As far as we know, it's stopped, but the damage is done. That happened in January.
But as
No
far as
one's
I
we
would say
know,
we
it's
stopped
not
the bleeding, but the
definitive,
wound is
like,
still-
yes, the
but it
building
won't
is
bleed
good to
anymore.
go.
Yeah.
It's not, there won't
I
be
guess it's
anything
as
in
good as
there.
mine.
It should be
Got
gutted,
it.
so.
Hey, is there a better
Records
way
wants
to
to
share
store
information? Because there's like Facebook pages and emails, and some of us can't access those Facebook pages.
We posted everything on littletonma.org. If you go to, our minutes are on there, so when we have a meeting,
If you go to the agenda, all the documents are on the agenda.
Okay,
Yeah, it's kludgy, because they have everything separate, right?
yeah,
They have-
it's really not an easy way to see what's going on.
Yeah,
An
I
easy
struggled
way
with the
to-
same.
Yeah,
No, I
we're all in the same boat in
This
terms
was a-
of
thank you,
having
everyone.
a hard time getting the information we want.
This was a beautiful
Did you have another one maybe after, May, or once the RFI and RFP, that would be great
Yeah,
to have
We
some-
could,
some
I don't see
how
why
it
not.
goes.
It would be helpful to have like just a Q&A session. I think there's a lot of questions that people
Yeah,
want
I know,
to
and
ask.
so to your point, I know we're over time. You can ask questions at the orchard. In the gray hat, I know you had a question, you had your hands raised? Yep.
He just asked it.
Oh, okay.
You referenced a collection of information. I was wondering where that was, and now I understand. I
By
would
the
like
way,
a better source too.